Good morning, good afternoon, good super morning. It's like 3 o'clock in the morning in the US, but a good time now in Asia, and we're in early morning in Europe. I'm joined by Joanne Ooi, who's a little bit washed out right now. Is there a light you can turn down a little bit? And we are here to talk about a bunch of different things. There's a lot of topics that I could speak about with Joanne, but in particular, very much a focus on consumers and what the first learnings we have out of the pandemic are, and what we can, what we can figure is going. What are the things that are coming next in terms of the pandemic and what's happening? So, Joanne, first of all, what are some of the big trends you've seen on the consumer front that you think will be lasting? And this is, by the way, based on your experience both through this pandemic, but also, both of us have been through a lot of this before. We've been to this rodeo before in Asia, with SARS and bird flu, H1N1, et cetera. So what are your first quick learnings?
Okay, the first quick learning is how laggard the world has been. I mean, save for Hong Kong, obviously. On a very simple basis, just like things like hygiene, but on a much more interesting basis vis-a-vis the consumer. I think that this pandemic is basically accelerating us to what I call a post-consumer society. And a lot of the psychological trends that have already taken root, for example, an increased awareness of environmentalism and climate change, have been even highlighted during COVID. So, for example, when we get something like, we're stuck in England where we're completely in physical lockdown and prohibited from going outside to do simple excursions, to shop, to run errands and things like that. So just simple basis when something comes from Amazon. Or let's say you're going to buy something more frivolous. I had actually written about this. I mean, because I personally and make my family sanitize everything, and of course it triggers this entire cascade of associations. So suddenly you think this package, which usually would not even give a second thought to, which arrives at your doorstep. You think, okay, it's beautifully, slickly wrapped with this automated process. You don't skip a beat and you just open it up automatically. But during COVID, we actually think, okay, I've got to spray this thing with my mild solution of bleach and water and wipe it down and leave it outside in UV rays and all this stuff, which makes you think, okay, human beings actually were dealing with this. And they're the ones who prepared this package so perfectly for me. The delivery man.
Did they cough on it? Did they? Who did this touch?
But it's also like you think, like subconsciously we live in this such a slick and seamless world that we just think they're like a bunch of invisible elves, the identities of whom we don't consider. But here you're thinking, who are those service workers? Who are the paid workers from countries who don't have labor and welfare benefits, who are working in the gig economy, who are probably losing their jobs on reduced schedules right now, et cetera, et cetera. Plus the fact that I used to greet my delivery man, I don't even do that. He basically he rings the doorbell, he waves at me to make sure that he registers that I accepted the delivery. It's stuff like that. Okay, so there's that, where we're actually made to think much more consciously about the supply chain and how it's actually impacting our daily consumerism on a very, very simple basis. Even a child could think about that, And I think and it goes down.
It's a humanization of the supply chain, in other words.
Exactly. That's an excellent, exactly. So it's rehumanizing the supply chain, something which we used to be much more familiar with when we didn't take for granted the fact that we could engage in consumerism in practically an asynchronous manner, which is another thing I wanted to bring up.
But in a funny way, it's bringing us back around more to the corner store and our relationship to how we get goods.
Exactly. Well, actually, no, it's showing how distant the corner store actually is. In the past, we wouldn't be scared of, I used to actually shop in the high street at a place where we would know it was just like a sundry store for food. And you'd go in and there would be huge vats of things like coffee, like the huge sack of coffee beans. Remember buying that in New York? Okay, like 25 years ago. We'd go in there and they'd take the giant scoop and they'd fill your paper bag full of coffee beans. I mean, we are so far from that. Yeah. And so because we're so far from that, we forget that still, no matter how much AI and roboticization has already taken place, there's still little people, not little, okay, they're people beavering away behind the scenes, making sure that we have this slick, perfect, seamless experience. So this is the kind of small friction, which is reminding us that we just can't take it for granted that this is just some kind of like invisible line item in the P&L, which we never get to see. So I think that that's something that we all need to think about. The second thing is totally related. It's about the fact that I'm stuck at home and it's verboten to run stupid gratuitous errands. Okay, so I've got to think. However, I was thinking about how every single time I go to the grocery shop and how it takes 3 hours, I still forget something. Okay, so last night I forgot something like mozzarella. Okay, so and how actually there is how incredibly egregious our inefficiency is on a routine basis, especially in rural countryside where I live. So about, and we think we're still getting some level of unbelievable convenience as consumers, even now during the pandemic, with all those deliveries, all those white vans covering my neighborhood every day, doing Amazon Prime drop-offs. Okay, so but that makes you think about the use of transportation and global logistics. So, for example, we could be having consolidated drop-off points in a neighborhood, which would actually provide us with some reason to go and take a walk, to go pick up the packages that we inevitably receive, like several times a day. It could be the fact that I should be batch consolidating errand running between my neighbors in the immediate geographical catchment in order to reduce our carbon footprint. And that is a benefit which would redound to us in rural, village, country life permanently, because it could give us, it would create a sense of mutual aid society, so to speak, virtually, and also cut down on our excursions into town. On the other hand, maybe people in the country actually are desperate to have these excursions into town because they're bored out of their minds. I don't know. But I think that this is a kind of thought about the localization and the increased efficiencies that we need to try to achieve. Now, speaking to
so that's number one is humanization of the supply chain. Number two,
I would say environmentalism of climate change, of the wastefulness of our daily patterns of resource use.
Personal inefficiencies at a personal level. And, yes. And thinking out new ways of dealing with them. Because I like the example you're talking about where you're pulling in what all the things your neighbors need. I mean, it's kind of a Groupon like thought in a way.
Yes.
Why is it that you and your neighbors, or you and some neighbors near you, all want to buy rice or tinned tomatoes? Why isn't it that there is not an easier way or a better way to share that resourcing in a way that would bring together the local neighborhood, exactly, and also reduce the carbon footprint of the deliveries?
Okay, I actually recently launched a newsletter in which I just have these personal ruminations, but I actually mentioned two business models that came up in my mind on this topic. One was an idea about like, if you have immediate neighbors, let's say I'm sitting next to I'm in a house, I got 3 neighbors who are elderly, let's say. I have a friend who actually gave me the idea for this app. And every time he goes to the grocery store, he says to the 3 older people who live right next to him, "Does anyone need anything?" Okay, so it's as simple as that. It's basically like a virtual wave to your neighbors to say, "I'm about to go to the grocery store. Can I pick something up for anybody else?" That could be dry cleaning. It could be, because we're finding that this pandemic brings home exactly how inefficient our behavior is, how often we dart out of the house to do one thing here, one thing there, because we're kind of thoughtless about it. And even now when we're I'm making my grocery list like a military operation with that level of detailed planning, trying not to forget anything. And yet I still forget. I run out of stuff and I still need to buy bits and bobs. And luckily I have friends who bring over, I have a tennis court. I don't worry, I'm not playing tennis with them because I just let them use a tennis court. But they will say to me, "I'm coming over today. Can I bring you something from the grocery store?" Okay, so it's that kind of mentality. On the other hand, the other idea was also speaking to the point of the consolidation of effort and resources. I was thinking about how in the countryside there are so many food suppliers and farmers, not necessarily farmers, but suppliers of processed foods. For example, like say honey, bacon, marmalade, whatever. Okay, all the stuff that you would ordinarily find stocked in a farm store. And I was thinking, what are all the suppliers doing? They're just sitting on huge piles of inventory because there's either not any employees or the transportation is basically massively bottlenecked with excessive demand for trucking and delivery. So, I was thinking that this is a time when, anyway, food processors should be disintermediating the supply chain by bypassing the typical wholesale distribution, and we should be setting up what's basically a virtual farm shop e-commerce platform for them. And this is a type of salutary development which should be taking place, because that will vouchsafe a more profitable future for those kinds of local food suppliers, as well as assure a better and higher quality supply of locavore processed and processed food, livestock, green groceries, what have you. So this is a kind of mentality that
right. So I mean, you can see if you set that up in a localized way, you could have even more than a group buy. You can have a group sourcing.
Exactly.
Sourcing meaning that you're looking not just to buy eggs, but you're trying to find what are the nearest eggs that we can get, because we've now got a critical mass of 15 neighbors. We need this number of eggs, instead of buying eggs that have been sent down to Covent Garden Wet Market and brought back up again. You will actually be sourcing them. You're able to source them locally by putting out maybe offers or demands for what they are. So it's almost like a corner store that aggregates demand.
I like that too, Tom. That's like Pinduoduo, but for the countryside. But no, not necessarily. That was actually, as you know, I had a business like that. Okay, now, but no, I'm thinking of just more. Actually, I think that all those models, Tom, are in play right now. This is another thing that eventually we may talk about, how so many business models, which are inevitably going to be developed, we're speeding towards them now, because this crisis forces us to think about better efficiencies across the board, because of these frictions that we are newly encountering, which ordinarily are really in the background. Now they're really emerging in the foreground, and we really need to think about them urgently. I also want to bring up another point. Another thing I've been reading a lot. This pandemic is going to last possibly 2 years on and off. Intermittently, we're going to be dealing with problems before the vaccine comes on the market or is available. And therefore, this is actually an unprecedented window of opportunity for disruption exactly of this sort, because this thing is not going to go away. And it's actually going to maintain conditions for testing these business models, which otherwise are not going to exist again, probably. So there will remain intense commercial pressure, which will be intermittent during this 2-year period. And I think that actually it basically ripens these ideas and makes it urgent to develop them as soon as possible.
Okay, well, let's.
Well, I don't want to get too far afield. The second trend or the third trend? Yes, we were talking about.
But looking at trends in general, let's look to see the experience of SARS and Hong Kong, which was a pretty intense period. The most similar experience I've had, certainly, to pandemic. What were what consumer trends did we accelerate there? I mean, certainly there's a huge one around hygiene. The cleaning of lifts became a regular thing and remained one. A huge shift in that. What are the other consumer trends that were accelerated by SARS and you think are lessons for what we can see going forward?
I think that, of course, the hygiene one, as you said, I think that as a consumer, I think we're going to be dealing with a whole nother layer, obviously, in transportation and travel. I don't think that that's ever going to go back to the same. There's a huge amount of commentary online. You're in communications and digital media. I mean, you would be following this quite carefully, and with your experience, especially in Greater China, about what level of invasiveness is required in order to stave off this kind of mass cataclysmic public health crisis. So I think that we're going to be giving a lot more thought to just the idea of interpersonal interaction. Now, that didn't happen during SARS, although it did, obviously, during a short period of time in a very confined geographical area. Now, because we did not experience SARS in 2002 in the incredibly intensive, intensive media coverage, where literally every few minutes people were refreshing their browsers at the beginning of COVID, because I was doing that. I think that we were all doing that. Yeah. And I think that, when we went through SARS, I think what is so interesting is that we were basically flying blind. We had some very crude, we didn't even have any basic epidemiological information about it. We were just scared out of our minds because we just knew people died from it. We were not able to compile in real time, actually, the daily vital statistics of its damage to society. So in a way, it was better. Like, actually, we were probably—
you didn't see how sharp it went down. I mean, one of the most striking things for me about SARS was how quickly it went from that down to sharp up. And
Yeah.
you've spent last week in the stock market in the US. I don't know how long that will last, but the scale of this is very different, and the context of it is very different in terms of freaking people out, basically. And that's a hugely important element of it, of course. I think you're right. With SARS, there was a blindness to it that we had. This was 2002, 2003. We didn't have Facebook. We didn't have all these other elements which would allow us to share what was going on. At the same time, I think that we have to take into account that these platforms and new means of communication do allow people to organize and do things more quickly. And I think one of the huge ones, actually, Peggy Liu just said, hello, Joanne. People like Peggy have been very involved in putting together sourcing for masks and other equipment in ways that would not have been possible in a previous era. So I think that there is a information overload element of these platforms and what they brought to the pandemic, but there's also a find solutions element of what they brought to the pandemic. And I think that will have an impact on consumer behavior. And I think that people are, for me, one of the bigger ones is the wearing of masks, which has sort of been de rigueur. Everybody's doing that in Asia already, but it's taken a while for it to come to the West. And in the US, there's been large pushes for that. Jeremy Howard's been pushing that very hard. And for whatever reason, they've got the breakthrough thanks to the social platform. So it is helping to push the positive change or adaptation, I guess, as well as create that sort of panic scenario, which is another challenge.
Yeah, no, I think so. Definitely. It's going to be a recurring phenomenon of life. I mean, basically like climate change catastrophes, like wildfires, floods, tornadoes and stuff like that. And it's akin to that in terms of these kind of force majeures are going to be happening again and again, not all the time, but with enough frequency that we need to ensure against them. But I wanted to go back to the Hong Kong context. The other thing in Hong Kong, besides the hygiene, I mean, it had a big ripple effect. So in the airports with the temperature monitoring, the spraying of sanitization, aerosol inside the cabins of planes. I mean, I think that basically Hong Kong has always been far, far ahead, since SARS. So I think that basically, I mean, we need to think about large scale social gatherings now, and that's going to just change that could have huge effects. We haven't even begun to think about that. I mean, so
what has happened with that? Are we no more concerts, no more conferences?
Okay, here's an incredible thing, which maybe one of us. For example, the FT has FT Live, which is the conference and event arm of their entire business, which is relatively new, and they basically were able to put it online at light speed. They just launched it yesterday. Okay, so that is a kind of thing. We have to think about how our interpersonal interactions, such as networking, which is genuinely the main reason why someone would buy an admission ticket, which costs £2,000 to a conference. Okay, how can that actually be supplanted effectively and satisfactorily with a virtual platform? Can it be? Or does
it's really tough? I mean, the challenge with events is the huge value is definitely connecting with people, and the connecting with people is very rarely in the form like we're doing, which is a direct conversation, Joanne. It's more on the sidelines of an event where you bump into somebody. It's serendipity, and the challenge I see in this is we're going to be losing this serendipity element as we move forward.
That is, Tom, that is so big. Well, I mean, okay, going back to consumerism, now this is way more abstract, okay? Shopping used to be already a pull experience. Remember in the 80s, we'd go out shopping? You go out shopping, you go to the mall, you have no idea what you're going to find in a store. Okay, so a conference is kind of like that. And it would be a pull experience, like we're rifling through racks of jeans, hoping to find the right t-shirt, whatever, right? Everything is a push experience now. There is very little serendipity. Our minds are basically living within this very tightly controlled, unbeknownst to ourselves, of course, where we're getting a continuous algorithmic feed of stuff, which is basically cementing our confirmation bias about what we want to buy and believe. Okay, so that is basically, so that is actually an excellent point about the lack, like the dwindling of serendipity in modern life, and that's very sad.
Well, and I think that has implications that go very deep, because it is not just about what you're buying and what you're consuming or what you're looking for on Google, et cetera, but it's also going to have an impact on social mobility. because people will tend to lock
Yes.
in where they are right now because of that lack of serendipity, that lack of ability to have that human contact. You're not going to be able to meet that person from an unexpected background, unexpected
Yeah. I
past.
married to somebody like that. I married to somebody like that who only goes out. I mean, I think he generally was, living in Hong Kong. I'm just going to say personal side. Imagine the narrowness of your human experience. You move to Hong Kong when you're in your 20s. You live the life of a privileged colonial British expat, and then you move out to the countryside. You happen to be a Tory. You don't, and and you're in your late 60s, and you're only basically the only interpersonal interactions that you have are self-selected, and they're basically again reinforcing all of your political, social biases. Yes, it's extremely dangerous. I have a brother who lives exactly the same way. Who refuses to even do video calling. Okay, so basically, I mean, you're right. I mean, I experience this on a micro level, even within my own personal direct network. I mean, so you're right. It's very, very dangerous. I mean, and I sense it even when I visit the United States, where there are vast expanses between neighborhoods, and you've got to get into a car. And maybe the only time that I'll actually interact with somebody in the pinball machine of life, maybe be at a fast food place where I'm picking up food, literally. I mean, that's the nature of our atomized, technologically.
So with the atomization then of society or social life and engagement, there are lots of implications around that. Everything is going to be so much more intentional. Everything's going to be so much more selected. And I guess those, introverts versus extroverts, it's going to be interesting to see. Some people will feel more comfortable using video technology. Your brother is not. Some people will feel less comfortable at it. Some will be more skilled at it, less skilled at it. And that's going to be a different kind of way in which people will need to adapt and learn to thrive in this new society.
I actually was, whenever I give advice to young people, actually, I am very worried about introverted people unless they're technocrats, basically, where they can actually thrive behind the scenes in the back office and be back of house, basically. Because I think that, as we know, self-marketing, self-presentation, the ability to do video, to stream, to do like basically everything, market yourself, is becoming an integral part of a tool, like your professional toolkit. If you can't do it, I think it's actually very difficult. You must actually push yourself out into the world, exactly because of all the phenomena that we're discussing. And for those people who don't feel comfortable, let alone adept doing that, I mean, I think they will be very badly challenged. And in the pandemic highlights that. I think some people probably the other day I had a Zoom call. Luckily, all these people were retired. I mean, it took us 20 minutes to get the Zoom call going. So it's that kind of thing. I mean, I think that if you're naturally introverted, it's very challenging terrain in general, professionally.
Well, one interesting thing is some people are introverted in certain circumstances, and people who might be more introverted in a one-on-one basis will feel courage in a video basis. So I'm hoping that can help. But I do think that society in general undervalues introverts to a huge extent. I think social media has already started that trajectory of undervaluing introverts, more reflective, more deep thinking perspective on life. And I think that COVID is going to have an even further impact on that. Who's the people unwilling to speak up in that conference call on Zoom will, who could have previously walked and had a little conversation in the hallway after the meeting and said, well, do you think that's really such a good idea? Now we're losing that. What I'm finding more and more with my interactions is those side channel conversations are really pretty inefficient because you have to set up the call. You have to set up the time. Are you available now? You can't know that the person, you can't see the person is standing by the water cooler and just walk up and talk to them. So I think that we need to find ways to do that. And I've also found that in engaging with people who chat is the nearest that we have to that. And chat is not a bad tool for having that element. You can have a quick chat, resolve something, or move something along on the side. The challenge is that some people still aren't on chat. They haven't figured out how to use those tools, and we need to get a unified way of using them and build up this new social contract. I feel like there's a new social contract that is being built up, and people need to understand that and evolve their skill set around that, or face, a lot of challenges.
Yeah, extinction. But I mean, actually, it's very interesting what you're talking about, the new social contract, because also you're thinking now about entire classes of people who are going to be disenfranchised in society potentially, whereas it used to be women. It could be people who are introverted. It could be people who are technologically not capable for whatever reason, whether it's resistance or whether it's just a lack of exposure to it. I mean, you're right. We're coming to a totally different set of fissures and divides within society, where you can have entire groups of people, basically their opinions and their voices are going to be invisible or unheard.
And that has impacts throughout every
right age. That's a gigantic topic that's really important. So I hope you're going to write about that, okay? Because that's the first time I think it's such an important point. I mean, I have a son who's an introvert. Luckily he's not a massive introvert. I mean, but I, even when he was young, I would be concerned. I said, thank God you want to be a software engineer. What if you're an introvert and you're interested in English lit? I would say that, you're toast. What do you do in today's, what do you do, right? You're introvert. It's almost impossible. Everything is either you're a technocrat or you're a creative, generally. That's how society is bifurcating, and that's how value is being added nowadays. So if you don't fall into one of those buckets, I actually, we should make a matrix, and then you should speak to that and write a book about it. But okay, not in this call. But I think
we talked a lot. Are there any other consumer trends to highlight, or is
another big one? Another one huge one. Okay, so besides all the stuff which could just be neatly encapsulated under generally the polarization of wealth, which would include stuff we touched upon, labor exploitation, heightened awareness of the polarization of wealth because of the identity of those frontline service workers and transportation and health and all those carers. Besides that, I also want to say that the polarization of wealth and the fact that I'm able to, quote unquote, enjoy the pandemic in the comfort of my home, is the fact that I don't want to post anything on Instagram. I don't feel like showing that I have the prerogative to go outside and walk around my garden, or I think it's also going to sound a death knell of show off culture. I hope so. At least in this moment, no one feels like that. People are actually thinking, oh gosh, wow, my nombralistic, pampered lifestyle, is this the right moment to actually flash it to the world and say, wow, look at me, I'm gorgeous and I'm rich, and all these rich luxury, all these luxury brands want to be my friend. I think that that's a very important phenomenon that's taking place. It's causing people to engage in soul searching, which ordinarily they can just ignore. This is not something, because right now, you're sitting at home, you're having cocktails the entire day. One of the only things you could do potentially is write a social media post. This is the time you don't feel time pressure to do it, but because it's actually a very conscious act right now. So you've got to think, okay, the person who is for those of you who aren't in Asia watching this, key opinion leader, social media leader, influencer, whatever. You got to think, okay, they have to write posts on a paid basis. They've got to re-gear their personas to dovetail, or at least not offend the audiences, their audiences during this extraordinary period of maybe kind of some form of guilt or compunction about flaunting it the entire time. So,
but I think, I'd question whether
that's your area.
I'd question whether that's a short or a long-term trend, because I think that you're going to quickly get back to the show-off culture as the lockdown proceeds. I think that also there's going to be more of an echo chamber of people within their circles. I think that the challenge here is how are we going to make sure that we don't waste a good crisis and have good outcomes from the pandemic. I think that the challenges in the past, a lot of crises have been wasted, and not so much good has come out of them. With this one, I hope that there's going to be a heightened awareness of climate crisis, inequality, and the need to bring people together. But at the same time, there is that fear of this social stratification and this solidifying of people's social circles, because those are the only people they can connect with readily via something like Zoom.
Guiltlessly. think that on the good side, on the good side, Tom, a lot of those luxury business will go out of business. Okay, so one of the things I'll be writing about is how the art industry is never going to be the same. We're going to see mass extinction of middle to small size art galleries, the amount of flying around that is entailed, all that stuff. Every single art fair is, it's teetering on. They were already financially precarious because of what they sell, which is only a mass gathering. Okay, so they have to completely rethink their entire business models. That's one of the biggest points of convening in the Jet Set Cafe Society calendar. I mean, that's got to be rethought. So I think that we do have a lot of hope. I hate to use the word, but part of me, my left-wing Schadenfreude, is very pleased that that this crisis is happening, because it will bring a lot of these businesses who are long overdue for a massive rethink of their business models to do that, or they will go bankrupt. So, and rightly so. I mean, so that sounds terrible, but because a lot of these people are clients, but who cares? I don't think I think because it will be a protracted crisis. I don't think we're going to bounce back. I think there will be first a radical bounce back. But then when it happens, when there are going to be successive recurrences of lockdown, I think people will be like, wait, this is the new normal. I hope there will be a more permanent shift in how people are consuming. But
yeah, because at this point, we have to presume that it's going to be 2 years of this until we get either a cure or vaccine or herd immunity.
Yeah.
Which is probably 2 years down the road. And what we've seen even in somewhere like Singapore is the rolling back of outbreak. And if you have it in Singapore, you're going to have it everywhere in the world. Singapore is highly controlled, highly competent government at controlling pandemic diseases, having had experience with it. And if they are having issues with it somewhere like the United States or Brazil, Mexico, these places are going to be horribly hit when they don't have leadership that is focused on it. And we're going to have just a rolling crisis for a period of years. And I think that will have an impact in the short term on the way that people behave, like we've spoken about. In the longer term, you have to think there are people who are coming of age in this right now. This is their Woodstock moment, the defining moment of their generation, their Vietnam War moment. And that will have rolling impact on how they view the world and see things and what is important. I think that next generation is going to be crucial, as they're the ones who are going to be confronting the climate crisis head on. And it's going to be interesting to see how they react to this and hopefully take positive out of it rather than just negative and apocalyptic elements.
How do you, I mean, you have 3 young kids, so how are you feeling about that? Your children. I mean, do you have any? Because I have a house full of 7 adults here, 5 of whom are millennials. So also, which is super freaking stressful. But so I can tell you, I mean, so far, because when you're that age, and you haven't, it's hard to have any presence of mind when something like this is happening. We're so much older, I don't see them being impacted yet.
With our children are younger. They're from the age of
so they're too young.
Probably 10 down. For them, this is
no school. That's what they
know. Yes, it's like long summer holidays. They're spending a lot of time between the 3 of them, getting very close, that's the positive that's coming out of it. But I don't think that they're of the age to get it. I think it's people who have come out of university. They're just in their first job. That's the sort of person who is going to be most affected by this on some levels, because they had a normal and they're now having to change direction to this new normal. And I hope that they can take out of this something that will help us all, which is the positive lessons. Yeah.
Okay. Well, I think that's pretty much been on my mind about consumerism, and there's a lot of I'm very interested in the introversion.
Yeah, introverts are so important.
The new civil compact.
Yeah.
But anyway, it was great talking to you.
Great speaking to you, Joanne, and speak soon.
Okay, bye. Have a good weekend.